Okay, good evening. Welcome to the Halacha Shir. Tonight's Halacha Shir, we're going to talk about frozen challah and pull-apart challah in terms of Lechem Mishna. So can you use a frozen challah as your second Lechem Mishna? And what's the story with the pull-apart challah? That you've got these big, large, round challahs which are made up of, 10, 20 smaller challah rolls, and they're baked together as one piece, but yet after you make hamoitzi, you break them up and divide them amongst the guests or whoever's at the table. And the question is, do you need a second challah in addition to that? Or what if one of those challah pieces falls away, is broken off? Does that spoil your Lechem Mishna? Is it not sholem? So that's what we're going to discuss. And the connection to the parsha is a very good one. The Pasuk says in Parshas B'Shalach, Vayhi bayom hashishi loktu Lechem Mishna. So there you go. They gathered the Lechem Mishna. Of course, it's referring to the mon, that it didn't fall on Shabbos, and on Friday, Bayom hashishi, they took two pieces fell, two portions of mon fell, and loktu Lechem Mishna. They gathered in Lechem Mishna, a double portion of the mon. So the starting point is the Gemara in Shabbos. What we're going to do is give a bit of background to Lechem Mishna generally, and then we'll come on to some questions at the end which deal with the various issues, frozen challahs and pull-apart challahs, etc. So the starting point is the Gemara in Shabbos. If you're listening online, please email me at j.golker@gmail.com. I'll send you the handout. The Gemara in Shabbos, Kuf Yud Zayin, Amud Beis, says the following. Omer Rabbi Abba, B'Shabbos chayv adam l'tzoy al shtei kikaros. When you eat on Shabbos, you need to break bread, literally, over two kikaros, over two challahs, tichsiv lechem mishna, a double portion of bread. Omer Rav Ashi, chazina leili Rav Kahana, I saw Rav Kahana, to knock it tarte, he would hold two challahs, ubotzo chada, but he would only cut open, he would only break open one of them. Why? Because loktu ksiv. It says in the pasuk, in our pasuk, loktu lechem mishna, which means they grabbed on, they held on to the two. But when it comes to the cutting, it doesn't make reference to two. They held the two and then just cut the one. Continues the Gemara, Reb Zeira have a botza akulashe rusa. Reb Zeira would cut akulashe rusa. Now what does that mean exactly? We'll come back to that because this is a machlokas Rashi and the Rashba as to what it means. Either way, whatever it means, he would cut akulashe rusa, amalei ravina l'ravashi, v'hamechsi karav sanusa. But if you do that, it looks like you're a ravsan, you're a greedy, ravenous person. Amalei, he said, no, given the yomelei of it, since I don't do this during the week, for ha'idnahu daka of it, and I just do it today on Shabbos, lo mechsi karav sanusa. It doesn't look like greed. Now, ad kan the Gemara. So Rashi explains, logtu ksiv demashma achizav b'tzia lo ksiv Mishna. They held on to the two, but you don't need to cut both. That's the first case. That's what Rav Kahana did. Then the Gemara says, Reb Zeira have a botza kulashe rusa. What does that mean? Says Rashi, prusa gedola. He would cut a large piece. V'dai lo ba la'isasud v'lekavod Shabbos. So when he would cut the challah, he would cut a large portion that he wouldn't have to keep going back to the bread basket, to the challah bowl, that he would just cut a large piece of challah, and that would suffice for the whole meal. And that was done in Lekavod Shabbos, a big, chunky piece of challah. V'nira k'mechavev suda Shabbos. And that way he would demonstrate that he cherishes the Shabbos meal, his mahadeh, he enhances the Onik Shabbos, lehischazik v'le'echol harbe, to eat a lot. I remember once had a friend who was on a diet, and his ration or his diet allowed one slice of bread per meal. And so when it came to Shabbos, he had one slice of challah, and he looked at me and he said, "You should have seen the slice that I cut for myself." So it's one slice. So that's the Gemara says. He cut a large slice. That's how Rashi learns the Gemara. Now the Rashba takes issue with it. Says the Rashba, it's the next box. Reb Zeira botza kulashe rusa. Pirish Rashi chatich he cut a large piece for himself. Sheish b'dai kulashe rusa. That would suffice for the whole meal. That's what the Gemara means. Says Rashi. Ve'ena mechuv be'enai. I don't think that's pshat, says the Rashba. It doesn't flow, it doesn't follow from the previous bit of Gemara. The previous bit of Gemara says that Rav Kahana held two loaves, two challahs, and cut one of them, and then Reb Zeira cut a large piece. It's like a non sequitur, it doesn't really follow. And furthermore, the other Rabbi, Kol shul marbe b'chaticha have ayin yofe. On the contrary, you're meant to cut large slices, as the Gemara says in Brachos, Balabayas boitzeh kadesh yivtze b'ayin yofe. the balabais is the one who should really make moitzi. If you want to be mechabed somebody else to make kiddush, that's fine. But the balabais should be the one who's making moitzi. Why? Because it's his challah, and therefore he'll cut generously. And Chazal wanted people to have, generous portions, and therefore that he would cut ba'ayin yofa. As opposed to a guest, he wouldn't feel comfortable cutting such large portions. So therefore, if it's commendable to have large pieces of challah, why would the Gemara criticize such practice as Rav Sanusa, as greed, as ravenous behavior? And nearly, so therefore the Rashba gives an alternative pshat. Says the Rashba, to botza al kol hakikaris. What he means is that he would cut both challahs. So therefore, if Kahana would hold two and would only cut one, but Rabbi Zera said, no, I would cut both. Or mishum de kamrin de nokatarti botza chada. That's the continuation of the Gemara. The Rabbi Zera would actually cut both, etc. Okay, Ad Kan, the Rashba. And therefore it looks like the Rav Sunusa, it looks like a little bit greedy. You're cutting both challahs, dividing it all up. Why are you cutting so much bread? And he said, no, I don't do that during the week. I only do this on Shabbos, and therefore it's not considered a ravenous behavior. Okay, that's the Gemara in Shabbos. Now, how do we paskin? What do we do? So the Shulchan Aruch, this is box number 3. The Shulchan Aruch in Hilchos Shabbos in Reish Ayin Dalet, Sif Aleph says, Boitzeh al shtei kikar shleimus. You make moitzi on 2 whole challahs, she'eich shtein biyodei uboitzeh hatachtoina. And you hold both of the challahs, and you only open the bottom one. So you only have to cut one, which is like Rashi. Like Rav Kahana. Says the Ramah, v'dafka b'leili Shabbos. This concept of only taking the lower one, the tachtoina, is dafka on Friday night. Avol b'yom haShabbos or b'leili Yontov, but on Shabbos day, or both night and day of Yontov, botzei al ha'elyon, you actually cut the upper one. V'hatamu al derech Kabbalah. So for Kabbalistic reasons, we take the lower one when we hold the 2 Lechem Mishna, the 2 challahs. We take the lower one on Friday night. And on Shabbos day, and on Yontov night and day, we take the upper one. That's what the Ramah and the Shulchan Aruch say. The Mishnah Berurah explains, why are you holding both? Says the Mishnah Berurah, Shahari lo nema lechem Mishna ele belekita. That's the point of our Gemara. It says, Vahi bayom hashishi loktu lechem Mishna. They held on to the lechem Mishna. But it doesn't say they were boitseya, that they cut open or broke open both challahs. However, says the Mishnah Berurah, V'rashal v'shlo, the Marshal and the Shlo, Nagu lachtech shnehem, they were noheg to cut both. Kapirish harashba, like the Rashba said above. V'chein hiskim hagra, and that's how the Gaon understands as well. V'imak b'dan, if you're worried about the expense of cutting both challahs when it's perhaps more than is necessary, says the Mishnah, I've got a suggestion. Oise gimel challahs gedolos, make 3 large challahs. V'gimel katanas, and 3 smaller ones. And therefore, at each of the 3 meals on Shabbos, you actually cut 1 large and 1 small, and therefore there's no wastage. And the Olim are noig like the Shulchan Aruch. In other words, what is done around the Jewish world primarily is that you hold both challahs, and you only cut one of them. On Friday night, it's the lower one, and on Shabbos day, and on Yontov night and day, you cut the upper one. Now, this idea of cutting the lower one, the Ramah just says it's al pi Kabbalah. The Bach questions this. This is box number 4. I've seen great people say that you cut the bottom challah, and it's done al pi Kabbalah. This is, of course, the Ramah. And Ad Kan Loshen the Beis Yosef, and the Ramah brings it. V'chein pasuk b'Shulchan Aruch. V'ani Toma. I'm perplexed, says the Bach. How can you do that? Surely by going to the lower one, you're violating halacha, which is Mefurish Gemara and Yumalam Gimel and Aleph. You're not allowed to bypass a mitzvah. So if you go to the bottom one, you're bypassing the first challah. So how can you bypass an opportunity to do a mitzvah? You're mavirin ala mitzvahs. And therefore, I'm of the opinion, says the Bach, that you always break open the upper challah. Because whenever you have a clash between Kabbalah and Gemara, Toras Hamista and Toras Hanigla wins, and therefore the Gemara's rule of Ein Mavirin al Mitzvahs takes precedence over the Kabbalistic reason of going for the bottom one. And therefore the Bach concludes, you always take the upper one, and that's how I practice. And that's the Messiah, says the Bach, the Taz, top of the next page, who is interestingly the son-in-law of the Bach, and no doubt sat at his Shabbos table and saw the Bach do this. Says, he quotes the Bach, Kosav Meir V'chami, my father-in-law, my teacher, quotes, Vani Tomash Avra Adina Talmud, and he quotes the Bach I just mentioned. Lochein nira ikka kadas hagadolim sh'olim mevarach al elyon, and that seems to be the practice that you take the top one. Ve'in mashkichim matana kabbalah. Ad kan Hashem. That's what he's quoting in the Bach. Va'ani nohagti ba'atzmi, but I, says the Taz, the son-in-law of the Bach, I have the practice, k'shem mevarach al atachtoina. I make it like the Ramah says, that you take the lower one, but I just put the lower one a little bit closer to me so that I haven't violated the problem. Klal, there's no problem. So says the Taz, I can fulfill everyone. I can fulfill everything. In other words, I've got two challahs, and I just put the lower one a little bit nearer me, and therefore, when I'm ready to cut, the lower one is actually closer to me, and there's no violation of ein mavir in ala mitzvahs because I'm not being mavir anything. That's the first one I can access. And the Mishnah Berurah quotes this Taz, and that seems to be the contemporary practice that what one should do on Friday night, or for all the meals, that you hold two challahs, and on Friday night you cut open the lower one, but the lower one should be sort of a little bit closer to you, so that you don't have to bypass the top one in order to access the bottom one. It's a bit closer to you. Rabbi Rosler, who gave me some interesting marmakomas on this, he said he has his practice is to have a larger challah and a smaller challah, and he just places the smaller challah on top of the larger one so that it juts out a little bit, and therefore there's no problem of ein mavrin ala mitzvahs. Now that is true for Friday night, and as I said, but on Shabbos day and on Yom Tov night and day, you always go for the upper one. There's an interesting final sentence of the Mishnah Berurah there. He says, "Va'ayin le'el shelo yachtuch bekika ad acha habracha," that you shouldn't cut the challah until you finish the bracha. Kadeshu hakikar shlemus, that the kikaras, the challahs, should be sholim. Ein shom. Va'medakdekim regilim lirshem besakin kaidim bracha. Those who are very particular, they make a very small indentation on the challah where they're going to cut it after they finish the bracha, and they make that little rishima, that indentation, before they make the bracha. And the idea is that they know exactly where to cut, and therefore there won't be a hefsek between the bracha and the cutting. What you sometimes see is that you see people, they make a roshem before the bracha, but they don't really know why they're doing it. That's just the custom, let's say. And they make a little cut, a little insertion, and then they make the bracha, and then they spend a bit of time looking for the cut. Well, that makes no sense, because the whole point of making the rishima is to save time, and there shouldn't be a hefsek between the bracha and the cutting and the eating of the challah. So the best thing to do, if you can't find where you cut, just cut. Don't wait, because it defeats the purpose. So just to summarize, let me just take 2 boxes of tissues to summarize. Yeah, true. So even if you do make kiddush over the challah, for whatever reason, it will be the same practice. So again, you've got, let's use these 2 tissue boxes. So I've got my 2 challahs. On Friday night, the practice would be that I hold on to both with 10 fingers. By the way, I hold on, when it says your eiches, you hold on to both. There are 10 fingers and there are 10 words in the bracha hamotzi. Baruch atah Hashem Elokeinu melech ha'olam hamotzi lechem min ha'aretz. So with your 10 fingers, you're saying the 10 words, holding on to both challahs. And on Friday night, you just hold the lower one a little bit closer to you, so that as soon as you're ready to cut, to be b'tzer the lechem, to break the bread as it were, the lower one is near you, and therefore there is no problem of ein mavrin ala mitzvahs. That's the Taz's recommendation, which is brought by the Mishnah Berurah. But that is only true on Friday night. On Shabbos morning and on Yom Tov night and Yom Tov day, you would take the upper one. Okay, just one ha'ara before we come on to our pull-apart challah and our frozen challah and the other shilas. A very interesting observation from Rabbi Soloveitchik, Rabbi Yoshe Soloveitchik. Now this happened to us recently. We had a lot of guests last Friday night, Baruch Hashem, and Shabbos day it was quiet. It was Challa. So it was just me and my wife and one of the children. And I made for Challa. I just took 2 matzahs, and I broke open one of the matzahs. Fine. Then, but I know that my daughter doesn't like the matzah. She wanted to have the challah. There was plenty of leftover challah from Friday night. The question is, does she need to eat from the Lechem Mishna? So Rabbi Yoshe Ber Soloveitchik maintains that Lechem Mishna is just needed for the brach of Hamoitzi, but individuals, other people at the table, do not need to eat from the cut Lechem Mishna and can eat from any bread. So that's exactly what I did. So I made Hamoitzi on the two matzahs. I broke off some for myself and I gave some to my wife. And then one of my daughters, who I know prefers the challah, I just gave her a piece of the challah. It's not from the Lechem Mishna, but that's okay. Because according to Soloveitchik, you don't need to eat from the cut Lechem Mishna, you can eat any bread. So that's an interesting point. Now, let's go to our frozen challah, our pull-apart challah, and a few other shilas. 4 questions really. Number 1, can you use a frozen challah? Because at that same Shalosh Shudas, a few minutes after I had made Hamoitzi, my son comes along and sits down and wants to have Shalosh Shudas, but there's only one matzah left and he wants to have Lechem Mishna. What to do? So I told him that he can go to the freezer and pull out a pita bread, and he can use that. He can use the frozen second challah for Lechem Mishna. That's based on a Shmir Shabbos Kilcha. So this is the bottom box on the page. Yud Beis. This is in Perek Nun Hey. Mutzah letzaref Lechem Mishna Lechem Kafui. Says the Shmir Shabbos Mefurish, you're allowed to use a frozen challah as your second challah. Sherak achshav hotziu mitah kvar. Because even though you've just taken it out of the freezer now and it hasn't yet defrosted, that would be okay. So that's exactly what we did. So he took out a pita bread and he used the matzah as his to eat, and the pita bread was his Lechem Mishna. Okay, now the next thing, what if you only have one challah? Let's say there was no pita bread in the freezer. What to do? So says the Shmir Shabbos, this is in Sif Yud Zayin in the same parak, Ein lo shnei lechom shleimim yikach lechem shalem. If you haven't got 2 challah rolls, pita breads, matzahs, what you do is, you take one, if that's all we had, v'yitzaref olav lechem paras, and you just take that one and you take another slice of bread. So if there was no pita bread in the freezer, what he should have done is to take a matzah, that's one Lechem Mishna, and then take a piece of broken challah, that's better than nothing. If you haven't even got one challah, one sholem, one complete lechem, yikach shnayim prusim, then you just take 2 slices of bread. So you can take 2 of something, that's better than nothing. Of course, you should try and have shalom, but if you haven't, then you just take 2 slices of bread or 2 pieces of bread. Okay, that's the second question. Now, the third question, which also sometimes comes up, is, especially in Eretz Yisrael, not so much in England, but sometimes there is a bakery label on the challah. You can picture the ones from Angel Bakery or whichever bakery, and you actually have like a sort of a white piece of paper which is somehow stuck onto the actual challah. So the Shmir Shabbos says, this is in the same paragraph in Perek Nun Hey, the same chapter, but in Sif Tes, Divrei Ma'afe Shedbiku Bohem Toyos V'oleh Hashem HaMafia, that if you've got Angel's Bakeries or some bakery which is stuck on, Yasir b'somach lachil mishum chashash pari, you should remove it somach l'suda, and then just be careful not to tear the writing. And then he says in the footnote, and you should remove it after you've actually made hamoitzi, kadeshu shleimin b'shas habracha, because if you tear it off before you've made hamoitzi, it's no longer sholem. You've broken the completeness of the challah. And therefore the best thing to do if you've got that situation is to make hamoitzi, to take a slice of the challah and eat it, and then you tear it off, careful not to tear the writing, but to do it that way that you haven't made it, so you've made hamoitzi on something which is sholem, which is complete. Now, let's talk about our pull-apart challah. We're running out of time, so we'll just do it very quickly. In the last paragraph there, he says the following. Shnei lechom, this is the Shmir Shabbos Kilchas in Perek Nun Hey Ois Vav. Shnei lechomim, you've got 2 challahs. Shenidbeku zeh el zeh b'shas afiyosam. So imagine you've got 2 challahs baking in the oven, and they came close, they touched each other, and therefore they're sort of connected. Yoytze bohem yidei lechem mishna gam b'yosem devukim zeh lezeh. Because they were kneaded and were placed in the oven as 2 separate challahs, but they just later became attached and sort of connected in the oven, they're considered still as 2 separate challahs, and therefore you could use them for Lechem Mishna. However, yesh bein ha'achronim, there are some achronim, says the Shmir Shabbos, shecholek u'ledaiti yesh lahafrit oisom zeh mezeh. So, b'di eved, if you've got 2 challahs which sort of have come connected together because they were baked and they just at some point connected, they are considered two separate challahs, and therefore you could make Lechem Mishna even though they're sort of one joined big challah. However, it's better to separate them if at all possible, and do so in the neatest possible way to try and make sure they're still as sholem as possible. Now the question is that the same with our pull-apart challahs? Because sometimes, for example, here you can buy, I'm picturing the just baked ones. There are 6 small challah rolls, which they're in a sort of a clear plastic bag, and you can buy 6 challahs, and they're all connected. It's in one piece. Presumably the bakery, they just put 6 pieces of dough, and then when they bake, they're sort of all connected, but they're clearly sold as 6 challahs. So there, the Shmir Shabbos, according to this, that would be considered a baker selling, let's say, a pack of 6 small challahs. That's considered 6 separate challahs. However, there is a tshuva of the Shalom Eshiv. The Shalom Eshiv in Mahdura Kama Chelik Aleph Siman Kuf Samach Zayin says that a pull-apart challah will be different, because he says that a pull-apart challah, which again is lots of little pieces of challah, and the idea is that you're meant to break them apart and distribute them at the meal. The intention is simply to make it easier to divide, but it's treated as one challah. You treat it as one big challah, and the only reason why you knead it and you bake it in that way is so that it will be easier to divide. But really, it's treated as one challah. So therefore, according to this tshuva of the Shalom Eshiv, the pull-apart challah is considered one challah only, and you would need another challah on top of it. And if parts have been broken off, then it would not be shalim, and you should use something else. You could use, if that does happen, it happens occasionally. My wife makes delicious challahs, and sometimes she makes the pull-apart ones. So if it has broken beforehand, so then you could just subtly make a lechem mishna on 2 smaller challahs on top, or something like that, or 2 pita breads or something, and then you could just eat a bit of that, and then you can distribute the pull-apart challah. But technically speaking, there is a difference between the baker who sells a pack of 6 small challahs. That's considered 6 separate challahs, but a pull-apart challah is treated as one challah because the intention is simply to make it easier to divide it. Okay, so just to summarize what we said, that the connection to the parashas Vayibay Mashishi Lok to Lechem Mishna, that based on that, the Gemara says that Chayav Adam Livtzeh Shtei Kikaros, and by the way, every meal you have on Shabbos has got to have Lechem Mishna, ideally. So therefore, even in the long summer days where you can, as I do, you go to Hashkama and you can wash at Kiddush, and then you wash again at lunch, which is Shalashudas, and then late in the evening at 7, 8 o'clock at night, if it's, it can be a long Shabbos day, which doesn't go out till 10 o'clock here in London, you want to have something else to eat, and you want to have some challah, really you should need Lechem Mishna again, even though you've already had 3 meals. Okay, so according to the Gemara, that you hold on to both and you cut one. The Rav Zera said he would ochel sherusa. Rashi says means cut large pieces. The Rashba says you would cut through both. That was the practice of the Shloh, the Marshal, and the Gan. But the Mishnah Berurah says that the minhag is like the Shulchan Aruch. You only cut one. And which challah you cut? The Ramah says you cut the bottom one for Kabbalistic reasons. The Bach says, but you're violating Ein Havrin ala mitzvahs, therefore always do the top one. The Taz says that the Eitzah is that you just pull the lower one a bit nearer you on Friday night, and that's what the Mishnah Berurah suggests you do. However, on Shabbos day, or Yom Tov night and day, you would always go for the upper one. Rabbi Soloveitchik has got the chiddush that you just so long as there's hamotzi made, and the person making hamotzi eats from that, other people can eat from any cut breads or challahs. It doesn't have to be from the Lechem Mishna. Can you use frozen challah? Yes. What if you only have one challah? So then just take another slice of bread. You've got one Lechem Mishna, and then you've got one other slice of bread. If you haven't even got that, you can just take 2 slices of bread. The bakery label, you can actually keep it. You should keep it on until after you made the bracha. Then you eat some of the bread and then you pull it off. Careful not to tear any of the letters. And the pull-apart challahs is treated as one challah because the intention is simply to make it easier to divide, as opposed to a baker selling 6 or so, whatever, small challahs. The intention was to have 6 separate challahs, and therefore that would suffice for Lechem Mishna. But preferably you should try and pull them apart as per the Shemir Shabbos Kilchasa. Okay.